They taped the eviction notice right to her door, bold red letters screaming like she'd committed a crime. My grandmother, 82 years old, stood there in her faded blue cardigan, hands trembling as she tried to make sense of why the HOA she'd supported for years suddenly wanted her gone. They claimed she was non-compliant, said her porch plants were clutter, said her roof color was unauthorized. But they weren't expecting the one thing she kept quietly tucked away: the truth about who really owned the land beneath every one of their homes. They pushed the wrong grandmother, and what they tried to take from her, she ended up taking back tenfold. Before the eviction notice, before the meetings and the shouting and the legal storm that would shake the whole neighborhood, life in Willow Bend Acres looked peaceful, the kind of suburb real estate agents call quiet and friendly, while the HOA patrols silently in the background. And for a long time, it truly was. My grandmother, Eleanor Hayes, had lived there longer than anyone, nearly 50 years. She bought her pale yellow house back when the street was still gravel, and the nearest shopping center was a 10-minute drive past giant oaks older than memory. She wasn't a loud woman. She wasn't demanding. She was the type of grandmother who baked pies for new neighbors and remembered every child's birthday, even when their own relatives didn't. People called her Miss Ellie, and the name stuck like honey to warm bread. When my parents divorced, her home became my refuge. The creaking porch swing, the mismatched curtains, the overgrown flower beds filled with color. It all felt like the safest place on earth. Even now, at 82, her spirit glowed. She wasn't fragile or fading. She tended her garden every morning, humming hymns, sun hat tilting, slightly crooked. She was the heart of Willow Bend Acres. Everything changed the year the HOA elected a new president, a man named Travis Whitlock. Early 40s, polished shoes, a haircut that cost more than my monthly grocery bill. He moved into the biggest house on the cul-de-sac, columns like a courthouse, imported grass trimmed to military precision, driveway lights arranged like runway beacons. And when he took over, he promised modernization, stricter standards, and revitalizing property values. What he actually brought was hostility. Within months, the board began issuing warnings for things no one had cared about for decades: garden gnomes, wind chimes, mailbox flags, porch chairs that didn't match. Even seasonal wreaths suddenly became violations. People grumbled, but most complied. They didn't want trouble. They didn't want fines. They didn't want to become the next target. But my grandmother, she was different. She wasn't breaking rules. She was simply living the quiet life she always had. Ivy on her trellis, a ceramic bird bath, pots of mint and rosemary, the same porch swing she'd had since before I was born. The HOA had never bothered her before. There was no reason they suddenly should now. But that's the thing. Travis didn't see her home. He saw non-compliance. He sent her a warning about the trellis first, then the bird bath, then a complaint about the unauthorized swing. My grandmother, confused, called me and asked, "Sweetheart, why are they upset about my plants? They've been here longer than most of these houses." And she wasn't wrong. Most people didn't know it, or didn't care to know. But Eleanor had lived on this land long before Willow Bend Acres even existed. Her house wasn't part of the original subdivision. It predated it. The developers had built the neighborhood around her home, buying up the surrounding lots while her single parcel remained untouched. Her property stood alone, a quiet island of history in a sea of newer homes. But the new HOA board didn't like that, not one bit. She wasn't under their thumb. She wasn't shaped by their rules. Her house didn't fit their perfect little grid of compliance. And control is something Travis wasn't used to lacking. The harassment escalated. She'd find reminders in her mailbox. Neighbors whispered that the HOA was targeting seniors because they didn't fight back. Board members paced her yard with clipboards, measuring things that didn't need measuring. One afternoon, Travis himself stood in her yard with a tape measure, writing numbers like he was surveying land he owned. When she asked what he was doing, he said, ensuring compliance. Even though her property wasn't under HOA jurisdiction, though none of us realized that yet. After weeks of warnings and nitpicking, everything reached a breaking point the morning I got a call from her with a shaky voice saying, "They're trying to evict me," from my own home. I drove over immediately. There it was, taped to her door. Notice of eviction, 30 days to vacate. The reason? Non-compliance with HOA regulations. She stood there, worn down by fear, clutching the paper like it might shatter in her hands. And something inside me snapped, because they had messed with the wrong person. My grandmother was not powerless. She just didn't talk about what she owned, or what she knew. Standing on her porch, I remembered something she'd once told me when I was a kid. This land has been in our family longer than these people have been alive. That's when everything clicked. They had no authority, no jurisdiction, not a single legal claim. And the HOA had just started a war with the one person who held the deed to their kingdom. Why? The days after the notice felt colder. Cars slowed in front of her house. Neighbors whispered. Some dropped off casseroles and notes of support. Others crossed the street to avoid being seen near her. But the HOA didn't slow down. They delivered a second letter. Failure to vacate may result in legal action and fines. Fines? For what? Existing. Board members walked her property with their clipboards, whispering as they scribbled notes. One day they brought a contractor. We overheard him telling a neighbor he was planning renovations. Renovations. On her land. I couldn't stand by anymore. The HOA meeting that week was packed. Every resident seemed to be there, hungry for answers or gossip. Travis sat at the front like a king addressing his subjects, binder full of violations in hand. He began speaking with that fake smile confidence he always wore. Ms. Hayes has repeatedly violated regulations. I stood. That's a lie. Gasps. Murmurs. But Travis kept going, projecting images of her trellis, her bird bath, her swing. People laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was absurd. Someone shouted from the back, "Those things have been there forever." Another yelled, "They're part of the neighborhood." The room turned on him. Then someone asked the question that cracked everything open. Is her property even under HOA jurisdiction? She's been here since before the development was approved. Travis's face went pale. He dodged the question. Meeting over. That night, I asked Grandma to pull out her old documents. She climbed into the attic and came down with a cedar box tied with a faded blue ribbon. Inside were deeds, land surveys, contracts dating back decades. And what we discovered changed everything. Not only did her land predate the development, she had perpetual land rights, exempt from any future homeowner associations. And buried in the developer's agreement was a clause stating her parcel was the anchor lot. The subdivision existed because of her land grant. The attorney we consulted scanned the documents, sat back, and said, "Your grandmother isn't under HOA authority. In fact, they owe their subdivision to her." The HOA had been harassing, fining, and attempting to evict a woman they had zero legal control over. We prepared for war, legal war. When the emergency HOA meeting was announced, the room was electric. Grandma walked in slowly, leaning on her cane, but carrying herself with dignity stronger than any rule book. Travis tried to maintain control, calling it a misunderstanding. Our attorney stood and dropped the deed on the table. He explained everything. The perpetual rights, the exemption, the illegal fines, the attempted unlawful eviction. Gasps filled the room. People covered their mouths in shock. Some glared at the board with fury. Travis stammered excuses. Our attorney shut him down with one line. You never had authority over her. None. The room erupted. People demanded resignations, accused the board of negligence and cruelty. Someone shouted, "You tried to evict the woman who owns the land." Then Grandma stood. In a soft but steady voice, she said, "I'm not here to fight. I'm here to remind you. I was part of this place long before anyone here moved in. I planted my garden before your rules existed. I waved to your children before you wrote your conduct codes. I wanted nothing but peace. But you tried to take my home. And I won't let anyone take the roots I spent my life planting." Silence. Then applause. Slow at first, then thunderous. Within minutes, a board member called for a vote of no confidence. Hands shot up. Travis stormed out, his authority collapsing like a poorly built fence. In the following weeks, the HOA fell apart. New board members were elected. Decent people, the kind who cared more about community than control. They voided all actions against Eleanor, rewrote bylaws to protect elderly residents, and apologized publicly. Grandma rebuilt her trellis, repainted her porch swing, planted a new herb garden, rosemary, mint, lavender. Neighbors came to help. Kids started playing outside again, free from fear of fines. The attorney secured a settlement, which Grandma mostly donated. She didn't want revenge. She wanted peace. One evening, near sunset, I found her on the porch swing, wrapped in a quilt, watching children play in the street. She squeezed my hand gently and said, "Funny, isn't it? They tried to throw me out of a place built on my own land. In the end, they're the ones who had to leave." She smiled, warm, tired, and triumphant. "People forget where they come from," she said, "but land remembers, and so do hearts." And as the last light of day touched the house that had stood longer than any rule or president, I realized something. She didn't just win. She proved that roots, real roots, always go deeper than control, and no HOA, no matter how loud or cruel, could ever uproot her again.